A true story written by 300C. Me and my best friend Colin experienced something in the Appalachian Mountains of Virginia that bothers us to this day. It happened in the summer of 2023, but it's taken me until the winter of 2025 to write this because it bothers us so much. Some backstory about our friendship. I promise it's relevant. Me and Colin met at Lowe's in the gardening section. I was unbelievably obsessive with houseplants and rare plants. He was unbelievably obsessed with reptiles, spiders, and all the other not commonly loved pets. We both had cars we absolutely loved, and it was basically an instant friendship. As we've been friends, he's slowly become obsessed with plants, and I have with reptiles. We've basically molded each other into the same person. One of our favorite activities to do is explore nature. We both have an incredible respect and awe for wildlife, and just being in the wilderness. We've searched in the deep woods for plants forgotten by people and science. For example, we've found and located Virginia's rarest fern species, the walking fern. Look it up. It's cool. To find this, we hiked in uncharted territory for close to 5 hours, up and down 2 separate mountains. This is just one of probably hundreds of instances. I think you can imagine our love for plants and wildlife now. Like I said in my intro, we're both from Virginia in the Appalachian Mountain area, which, may I add, is truly indescribably stunning. I lived pretty much in the middle of nowhere, but there was still civilization around me. Colin, on the other hand, where he lived made it seem like he was the only human that existed. He was probably 30 minutes from the closest store, no cell service, and in the deep woods. He lives on a plot of land that's basically 2 entire mountains that are completely untouched by man. As you can imagine, this is the absolute perfect place for us to explore and observe nature in its most pure and true form. Before I start the story of the day we went to the top of the mountain, I'll preface this with, we've both seen weird things in the woods, but we really haven't cared. For example, one day we were exploring, and all of the sounds of nature stopped. We just kinda laughed and said, well, guess it's time to turn back. If I'm being honest here, what we experienced that day hasn't stopped us from exploring in general, just not at the top of the mountain anymore. Our journey to the top of the mountain. I head over to Colin's house early in the morning for a big day of exploring. We wanted the most time to explore, and his house was about an hour's drive, so I got up and got going. Colin's house is nestled in the bottom of 2 mountains. The mountains are stunning and tower over everything. There's a stream that runs in between his house and the mountains. We decided today we were going to explore past his creek. Colin told me a story one time about something very odd that he saw while exploring. He was about halfway up his mountain when he came across a huge tree. The tree was absolutely massive and impossible to miss. As he got closer to the tree, he noticed a few large rocks, then a few more, then a few more, until he saw that these large rocks were made into a circular formation around the tree. He got closer and saw a fresh deer skull that was attached to the tree. He didn't investigate how it was attached, because he was creeped out and left. Now, in a more populated area, this could easily be explained by someone trying to mess with people. But that's not the case. It's quite literally almost impossible to get onto his land. His closest neighbor is miles away, and if there was a trespasser, they would have been caught way before they made it halfway up the mountain, 'Cause us Appalachian people are proud Second Amendment supporters and we ain't got nothing better to do than look out for people trespassing. All jokes aside, nobody is on his land except him, his dad, and me, which makes this deer skull and rock formation thing even more bizarre. I told him, "Hey, let's go look for that deer skull tree." He said, "I mean, okay, I don't know where it is really." And I told him, "Nah, we'll find it." After searching for a while, we kinda got sidetracked and went back to our usual looking for plants, snakes, bugs, and all that. As we make it up the mountain higher and higher, it keeps getting more and more steep and rocky. We finally get to this massive rock outcropping. It has several natural springs trickling water over the rocks. The rocks were almost completely covered in moss, and in the moss, ferns. So many ferns. And a rare species in Virginia, too. Resurrection ferns. These were by far the largest resurrection ferns either of us have seen, and still haven't topped it to this day. After admiring these gorgeous ferns for about 30 minutes, I told Colin, "Hey, yo, we're almost at the top. You ever been all the way up there?" He said, Maybe once. Actually, I don't know." And I said, "Well, let's go, dude." After we left the massive fern and moss rock is when things started to get weird. It was gradually getting more steep, and we both had to get on all fours so we didn't slip down the mountain. We're so high up that we couldn't see his house anymore, and it took us a solid 2 hours to get there. We finally reached what we thought was the top. It was a pretty large flat spot on the mountain that was super rocky. Once we realized we weren't quite at the top, we took an exploring break. He went one way, and I went another. I found another rock outcropping that slightly covered a rocky area below it. Maybe the first foot of a cave. Just enough to keep rain off one person if you really squeeze close to the rock wall. As I came across this weird outcropping, I looked down and saw something that bothered me to my core. And this is when the feeling started. What I saw was a small fire pit. The fire pit wasn't made out of rocks or anything, but you could tell it was definitely a controlled small fire. I called Colin over with a sense of urgency and showed him what I found. He got quiet too. I asked him, "Did you make this fire?" He turned to me slowly and said, "Dude, I've never been here. I want to remind you of exactly where we were. On top of one of Colin's mountains. No neighbors. Completely untouched land." We both started to feel uneasy, dizzy even. We attributed this to lightning striking the land, but I think we both knew in our hearts that it wasn't from that. But that was the most rational explanation at the time. We brushed it off, and kind of forgot about it because we saw some more cool plants. I told him, "Yo, come on, let's get to the top, man." We started hiking up to the top and got there in about 5 minutes. The view was gorgeous, but that stopped pretty quick. We stopped talking for a second, and then we both realized how absolutely silent it was. There wasn't a single sound. I looked at him and said, "Yo, why is it so quiet?" He said, "I don't know, man, but this is weird. I don't know why it's weird, but it's weird." I told him, "Man, this is kind of creepy. Why does it feel like this?" he said. I don't know. We stopped talking for about 15 seconds, and within this small time frame, we both were swept with the most intense and pure terror we have ever felt for what seemed like no reason. We looked at each other like we were on the same wavelength, and then we heard a loud but distant About 5 seconds passed between the chops. I whispered, "Dude, what the fuck is that?" He looked at me and said, "I don't know. I don't know an animal that sounds like that because that's 100% not a woodpecker." The chopping continued. We whispered to each other, and the only thing we could attribute to this chopping sound was an axe. We started walking towards the sound more. We wanted to find out what the hell this sound was, and why we were feeling so terrified. It sounded like it was just on the decline of the other side of the mountain, the side we didn't go up. There was a large pile of sticks, branches, and briars on the way down the other side of the mountain, so we just stopped. When we stopped, the chops got less frequent and louder. Now that we were closer, we now heard what sounded like a dog whimpering between each chop. We both whispered to each other to something of the effect of, "What the fuck, dude?" And as we were talking, we also started to experience this immense sense of dread that was now paired with the pure terror. We kept listening, and the chops and whimpering continued until we heard the loudest chop paired with the loudest whimper. And then, silence. At this point, we were basically unable to move, paralyzed out of fear. We were able to snap out of it and talk to each other for a second. More of the "what the fuck, dude," until it was cut short. Footsteps. Long, striding footsteps were coming up the mountain. I pulled out my phone to record it because there was no way that anyone was going to believe us. I was mostly focused on recording the sound because that's what was important at the time. Eventually, the footsteps started to sound closer, until it sounded like they weren't coming from a direction at all. It was everywhere. Once the footsteps started to sound like they came from everywhere, the whispering started. The whispering was not from me or Colin. It sounded like the footsteps, coming from everywhere and sounding like it was inside our heads. I kept recording and pointed to my phone to show Colin. About 10 seconds after this, we both got an even higher sense of dread and a sense of pure terror. I said, "Dude, it's getting dark. We need to get down this mountain now. I don't want to see what's coming towards us." We started our descent down the mountain. We were all but sprinting, making the journey as fast as we could while still being careful with our footing. We knew if one of us slipped and broke an ankle, we'd be fucked. As we passed the fern and moss rock formation, we both almost instantly felt better. We stopped for a second and started debriefing. I looked up at the top and saw the sun getting lower and lower, and told Colin, "Dude, let's talk later. We need to go. Now." We made the entire journey back down the mountain in 30 minutes. About a quarter of the time it took us to get up. We sprinted into his house, and his dad said, "Damn, what did y'all see? A bear? A cougar?" He chuckled, but then saw our faces. He stopped laughing and his smile faded as we explained what exactly happened to us. Colin said, "Hey, show my dad the video you took." I said, "Okay, check this out." I pulled out my phone, turned the volume all the way up so we could hear the footsteps and whispering. The video had no audio whatsoever. Me and Colin looked at each other in fear, and I later deleted the recording because of how much it terrified me. Me and Colin don't talk about this experience much, if at all. We still go exploring in the woods and love it with a passion. We just don't venture to the tip of his mountain anymore.